What's up guys? In today's episode, I'm going to be showing you, giving you tips on how to successfully grow your own variegated snow queen hibiscus. This is a tropical flowering plant that a lot of people do not know they can grow, but it's one of the nicest looking tropical flowering plants that you will ever grow. It is super easy to grow, but guess what? You need to understand the specific growing requirements for this plant in order to successfully grow it. Today, I'm not only going to be giving you that, I'm also going to be giving you my own personal growing tips and propagation tips as well. If you want to grow your own plant, well, you're going to get everything in this video. So let's go ahead and get started. Well, check this out, guys. The snow queen hibiscus, extremely ornamental. What is variegation? Well, that is when you get the white splashes on the leaves. But this one gives you a little more than that. If you give it direct sunlight, you also gonna get red splashes on the leaves. I don't know where the plant's originally from, but surprisingly, it does very well even here in the desert. So let's go ahead and get started with growing tips, and towards the end, I'm also gonna be giving you some propagation tips along the way. So let's go ahead and get started with sun requirements. This plant requires full sun anywhere in the United States. What do I mean by full sun? I mean full sun. If I ever tell you full sun, that means full sun in the desert. Unless you live anywhere else hotter than the desert, this plant will take full sun in your area. Can you grow this plant in the shade? Of course you can grow in the shade. But the problem with shade is it's not gonna get as colorful as in the sun. Also, you're not going to be getting as many flowers. As you can see, I have a lot of snow queen hibiscus right here. All these guys are in 3-gallon containers. But the more shady they get, the darker the leaves get. You can see a lot of the leaves are plain green. And this is what you're going to get if you grow your plant, especially in too much shade. They need direct sunlight in order for them to get the red splashes on the leaves like the other plant that I showed you. So do not be afraid to put your plant in full sun. Let's talk about the winter care. This plant is mainly frost sensitive in my area. That is zone 9B. Cold sensitivity, these plants have been able to tolerate low 20s, prolonged exposure in the low 20s without any issues. As long as you give them frost protection, they will be okay. Now, colder than 20 degrees, I do not know, because I never tested this plant lower than that temperature. But I know for sure, as long as you protect it from frost, it will make it. If your soil freezes in the wintertime, that is a different story. So at that point, I do not think this plant will make it in your area. If you want to learn more about frost protection, I got videos explaining exactly how to frost protect your plant. Link in the description. Let's talk about the plant structure. This plant is not a tree, it is a bush. What does that mean? It means once you put it in the ground, or if you have it in a container, you're gonna get a lot of shoots close to the base of the plant because it wants to be a bush naturally. Can you make it a tree? Yes, you can, if you prune everything on the bottom and you leave like a single trunk. You're gonna have to start early, because if you don't, as you can see, this plant is only about a year to a year and a half old, and it's got tons of shoots coming off the base of the plant. How big is this plant gonna get? Well, if you put it in the ground, you're looking between, biggest one I ever seen was, I would say maybe 8, maybe close to 10 feet tall, and that was a super old plant. So this plant is manageable. You can trim it, easy to maintain, easy to grow. Growth rate. Okay, let's talk about the growth rate. This plant has 2 specific requirements in order to fully grow. The first requirement is going to be direct sunlight. The second requirement is going to be heat. If you meet both of those requirements, this plant will grow very fast. In about a minute, I'm going to be showing you our cuttings that are just rooting out. And from that size to this size, it's about a year to year and a half. Now, keep in mind, your plant will not grow until it's fully rooted, either in the ground or in the container. Containers, it's a lot smaller space than in the ground. So in containers, obviously they will root out the container a lot faster and they will start to grow. These are the cuttings that I started about 3 months ago. And as you can see, they're all growing. They're still green. So a lot of them are actually going to be outpotting today because, well, they need to. With that said, let's talk about the root system of this plant. This plant has shallow, fibrous roots. The root system of this plant is not really that big. So is it safe to plant close to structures? Yes, it is. You can stick it anywhere as long as you have space for the canopy to grow. Now, keep in mind, if you have any water pipes right under the plant, that may be an issue because the roots are very fibrous, and if you don't water, they may go inside your pipes. Flowering. All right, so this is a flowering plant. How often does it flower? Well, as long as the night temperatures are warm enough. Normally, I don't see flowers out of my plant until my night temperatures start getting around 70, 80 degrees at night. This plant will continuously flower throughout the entire growing season. But remember, you also need light. So I've noticed if you keep them in full shade, they tend not to flower as often. So if you want nice looking flowers, make sure you keep your plant in the sun and also wait for warmer night temperatures. Let's talk about watering. How do you water this plant? Well, if your plant's in a container, you're gonna follow the 50% rule that I preach all the time. And that is, wet your plant completely, then every 6 to 12 hours, check your container and see how long it takes to dry 50%. However often that happens, that's exactly how often you water your plant. This plant right here, this huge one, it's already root bound in this container, so it's drying more often than a regular plant. So this plant, I'm watering 3 times a day. Now, this little cuttings right here, they were in my misting house. I use that to propagate cuttings and grow seedlings. So that mister was coming on every, I think every 8 minutes or 10 minutes for about 7 seconds. Now, as you can see, let me show you closely. The potting mix on this plant is actually wet. This plant's have been wet, I would say easily for the past few months. But thankfully the temperatures started warming up and they didn't rot. But they got roots on the bottom. These guys are ready to be potted. Not all of them, but a lot of them are. So I'm just trying to find one that actually has roots coming out the bottom. So I can show you what the roots look like. There we go. You see the roots, white, healthy roots, already coming out of the container. So these guys are gonna get potted into 4-inch containers. But water, just water when dry, and you're good to go. It is extremely hard to overwater a plant if the temperatures are hot and the plant is actively growing. So do not be afraid to water. Because if these cuttings right here go dry, even one single day, I will lose everything. So unless it's cold, my recommendation, especially if you're doing cuttings like this, is to keep them wet. Fertilization. All right, so how do you fertilize this plant? If you're planting in a container, that is very easy to do. I always use a slow release fertilizer like the one you see on the screen, Osmocote. Why do I use that fertilizer? Well, I can buy it locally, very easy to get, it's not that expensive, and it works on everything. The numbers are irrelevant, don't worry about the numbers, as long as you have some nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, any fertilizer will work on any plant. Do not buy into the specific fertilizers people sell or companies sell, trying to make you think that you need something special for your plant to grow. They do not. So when do I fertilize my plant? Well, you can see this is a brand new cutting. You can see the roots. So this plant is going into a 4-inch container, just like this. So what I do is I put a little bit of dirt on the bottom. What potting mix am I using? Well, you can check the link in the description for the type of potting mix that I use at my nursery. But anyway, so I put the plant in here. I gotta be very careful not to break it because it's wet. There we go, just like that. And then once they get potted, they get fertilized. So this plant is gonna get some fertilizer just in a few minutes and it'll be good to go for the entire year. This is the main reason why I like slow release fertilizers, simply because, well, I don't have to really worry about the plant getting food all the time, because it will release it slowly over time. Now, if your plant's in the ground, any organic material will work, such as compost, worm poop, cat poop, dog poop. I'm kidding. Anyways, but you get the idea. Any organic material you stick in the ground will work. As long as you water your plants in the ground, most times the living organisms will come to that area, and they are the ones that are going to feed your plant, even if you don't put anything else in the ground. But if you really want to, compost is a universal fertilizer, and that works on everything. Now that you know how to grow your plant and you're interested in propagating your own plant, let's go ahead and talk about propagation. Actually, before we get to that, let's talk about my own personal growing tips, which I already told you. Remember, this plant needs direct sunlight. It is one of the few variegated varieties that actually will tolerate direct sunlight. Most variegated plants, oh look, roly-poly. But anyways, most variegated plants do not like the direct sunlight. But this one, surprisingly, needs it in order to get the full coloring. You can see the roots right there. So that will be the only personal growing tip that I have about this plant, besides frost protecting it in the winter. Easy to grow. Now, how do you do cuttings? Well, there's one key element that you need in order to do cuttings. The first one is you need heat. So if you want to do cuttings of this plant, my recommendation is to wait until your night temperatures are about, at least I would say, 50 to 60 degrees consistently. It needs to be that temperature every single night. It cannot go lower, and expect it to get higher in the next few months. So usually in the spring, it's going to be the best time to start propagating this plant. You can also propagate it during the summer. You just got to make sure you have a misting system like I do, or keep the humidity high enough so that way your cuttings will not dry out. Because the trick with propagating any plant is to get the plant to root before it dries out. Because all the energy that you have, it's stored in that cutting. And you want that cutting to grow roots so it can uptake water before it dries out. That will happen a lot sooner in the summer than if you do it when it's a little cooler. But it's doable in the summer. You just gotta make sure you keep them water. Now, what size cuttings should you take? Well, you see these cuttings right here? They're about the size of my pinky. So usually that's what I try to take. But let me show you real quick. You can see all these cuttings right here. Not all of them are the size of my pinky. Some of them are smaller, some of them are bigger. Let me see if I find that video. I actually took a video when I was making the cuttings of this plant. So if I found it, you're watching it right now. But I was just pruning this plant. I think it was this big one right here. And I didn't want to throw the cuttings away. So I decided, you know what, I'm just gonna do a quick tray like this. I didn't even use rooting hormone. I just used my willpower, and I stuck them in the tray right here. The potting mix that I use for cuttings or seedlings is coco coir. Why? Because it's very easy to work with. It will readily uptake the water. When it goes dry, it will not become hydrophobic, meaning it will not repel the water next time you water it, like peat moss. It's just a lot easier to work with. So that's the main reason why I like to use coco coir. If you want to use the stuff that I use, I got a link in the description that will take you to my affiliate link where you can purchase it on Amazon. But that's what I use for propagation. Normally, I keep them short so I can put them in these little containers right here. And I want one node underneath the ground, at least, because that's where your roots are gonna come out of. So you want at least one in the ground. Other than that, you stick them in the potting mix and they will root as long as the conditions are right. Like I said, I do not use any potting mix at all. You can see this one doesn't even have any roots on all the way around, so this one is gonna have to wait. a little longer. But I know it's alive because it's growing leaves. If it didn't have any roots, it would have dried out by now. But other than that, stick the cuttings in your potting mix. You don't have to do this many. You can use a little cup or you can use anything. It doesn't matter. And wait. This right here, if I find, I don't remember exactly when I did it. Actually, it'll be right below the screen when these guys were propagated and how long it took for this to happen. Definitely a few months, and it took a little longer this year simply because my night temperatures took forever to warm up. This is one of the easiest tropical flowering plants that you can grow, and like I said, you can propagate yourself as your plant gets older. And it's one of the nicest hibiscus plants you can get out there. There's not much to it, just water, when dry, and you are good to go. And that's it, guys. That is how to grow your own snow queen hibiscus and also propagation tips if you decide to propagate it yourself. As always, if you like the video, don't forget to like it. And if you're interested in buying any of my plants that you ever see on my videos, you can find them for sale on my website. Now the size that we sell for this snow queen hibiscus is going to be about this size right here in 4-inch containers. Now these containers right here will actually take about a month to root this container before I can ship them out. And also I need to acclimate them, meaning I need to take them out of the greenhouse, expose them to the air, the sun, so that way when you get your plant, you can just stick it out there and start watering. You don't have to worry about acclimating your plant. So this guys right here will be ready for sale from the time of this video in about a month. Link in the description to my website so you can go ahead and order it. But if you order right now, remember it will not ship for another month, or you can simply wait until they are ready. Don't forget to comment below if you have any questions, and as always, I will see you next time.